This is The Journey, podcast edition. If what you're building didn't come with a playbook, you're in the right place.
Welcome back to The Journey, podcast edition. I am your host, Paul, and I'm glad you're here because today we're going to tackle one of those topics that every builder eventually kind of runs across, paid advertising. Now, when I say paid ads, I bet most of you immediately think of kind of Google search results, Google Ads, maybe a Facebook carousel or a pre-roll on YouTube. You probably bought a few yourself at one point or another, or you've worked with someone who's bought them for you. Maybe you've boosted a post on Instagram and thought, well, that didn't really do too much for me. Or maybe you've gone further and spent a real budget, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of dollars, and you feel a bit like you're pouring water into sand. The truth is, paid advertising can be one of the most powerful accelerators for your business, but it can also be a bit of a value trap. It's like fire. Contained and managed, it can warm your house or cook your dinner or whatever. Uncontrolled, it kind of burns everything down and then fizzles out. So in this episode, we're going to talk about how to use paid ads wisely. And I'll break it down into three parts. The good stuff about paid ads, the bad stuff, and the downright ugly. Then I'll wrap up with some practical advice for how you can get started in a way that sets you up for long-term success. Not just short bursts of traffic that disappear the moment you stop paying. Here's some context about advertising and not just, what we know as digital ads, web ads today. Before we kind of zoom in on the good stuff, let's zoom out a little bit. Advertising is not new. In fact, it's as old as commerce. 2,000 years ago, a farmer at a market shouting about how fresh his grain is compared to the stall next door, that's advertising. But fast forward to the 20th century, advertising becomes institutionalized and professionalized. You've got Madison Avenue in New York. You've got entire industries built around radio jingles, print ads, TV commercials. It's kind of the Mad Men era, right? Then the early 2000s arrive and suddenly, bam, paid digital advertising just explodes. Google launches AdWords, Facebook figures out how to monetize its social graph, and Amazon realizes that the search advertising within its platform, which was a retail store, is potentially worth, billions of dollars in revenue. For the first time, the traditional gatekeepers of advertising, the agencies, the big networks, they lose their monopoly, their share of that industry. Any entrepreneur with a credit card at this point can run ads, right? You don't need $1 million TV spot anymore. You can put $50 into a Google ad campaign and you can see results the same day and have a much better sense of what's working and what's not. That democratization is the good part of the story, but it's also where the seeds of the challenges that we experience with digital advertising today were kind of planted. Let's start off with the good. So giving paid ads their due credit first. The number one benefit of paid advertising in digital kind of spaces is instant access to an audience. Think about how hard it is to build your own audience organically from scratch. Writing posts every day, growing an email list, showing up consistently for months or years, trade shows. It's slow. It's important, but it's also really slow and it takes effort. Paid ads, especially digital ones, they shortcut that process. What you're really doing is renting somebody else's audience of eyeballs or ears, if you're listening to a podcast like this one. Google has billions of searches happening every day. Facebook and Instagram, billions of daily active users scrolling, tapping, liking, commenting, what have you. When you buy digital ads, you're tapping into those streams pretty much instantaneously. That means you can reach people who have never heard of you, but are ready to buy what you sell. If you're running a brand new business or if you're launching a new product, this gives you an edge, a competitive advantage that you wouldn't have had before. It's a bit of an equalizer and it can be a game changer. Paid ads they're also scalable. You find a campaign that works, you pump more money into it and watch your reach expand. That's why venture-backed startups lean so heavily on them. You can go from 0 to thousands of customers in a very short period of time. Let's not forget that paid ads come with tools too. On the self-serve side, you've got dashboards, targeting options, analytics. On the managed side, you've got agencies and media buyers who can build creative, place campaigns, optimize performance, and really do the work for you. So yes, paid ads can absolutely work. They're fast. They're flexible. They're often the quickest way to get your products and services in front of fresh eyeballs. Now, there's a bad side, of course, and this is kind of where the shine wears off. The biggest drawback is that paid ads are highly transactional. They have very, very, very little, if any, residual value. When you stop paying, the boost to your revenue, it just stops. That effect goes away. Contrast that with organic channels. If you create some great content that goes out onto a property you own, whether it's social media or your blog or something else, and people really like it, it can rank well in search, both traditional Google search and kind of AI generative search, and bring you traffic for a long period of time without incremental effort or dollars. If you grow a strong newsletter list, email list, those subscribers stick with you. If you build a community, it compounds over time. Paid ads don't do that for you. They're really like renting an apartment. You can live there as long as you pay rent. When you stop paying rent, out on your butt. So the effect on our businesses is that this creates a treadmill effect, especially for smaller businesses that are trying to scale. When you rely on ads to keep the sales coming in, you never get off the treadmill, and your costs will eventually go up for ads and for other parts of your business. And they always do, right? Like margins get squeezed. So, a platform can tweak an algorithm, demand goes up, competition gets a little bit more, fierce for the particular audience that you're bidding on. And all of a sudden your cost per click, it doubles, triples, quadruples, whatever. Here's the kicker. When you're over-reliant on ads, your marketing efficiency ratio balloons and kind of can get out of control pretty quickly. Just to recap, it's the measure of how much you spend to acquire $1 of revenue. If you're spending too much, you're eroding profitability without even realizing it. So, if you're bringing in $10 of revenue for every dollar that you expend on marketing, that's fantastic. But if you're bringing in, $1.25 for every dollar that you spend on marketing, that's a problem. That's a pretty serious problem because you've also got to pay for staff and facilities and operational stuff, right? So while paid ads can get you off the ground, they can also box you into a corner where you're spending more and more for less and less return. And that's kind of an ugly place to be, which is a good segue into the downright ugly part of paid ads. And this is the thing that a lot of industry insiders don't really like to talk about. Saturation. We'll start there. Media saturation. Human nature, how our cognitive processes work. We adapt really quickly to repetitive stimuli. So, think about the hum of your fridge. Your fridge hums and whatever, and it annoys you. And then after a few minutes, you just don't know it. But the hum is still there. That's your brain adapting to the presence of that irritating stimuli and tuning it out. It's also why you kind of slowly turn your car stereo up on a long road trip without even realizing it. Like your brain adapts to those stimuli that are unnatural. And ads are no different, especially, digital ads that have a very predictable, repetitive format in where they're placed on the screens that you're looking at. Once someone sees an ad a few times, it fades into the background. Once you look at a Google search page 100 times a day, like I do, you unconsciously know where the ads are, and your brain just automatically skips right over them. You don't even notice them. And that's why people, they scroll past banners, they skip pre-rolls on YouTube without even really thinking about it. But the businesses that bought those ad spots are still paying for the impressions, right? I mean, not to be unfair to YouTube, if someone skips an ad within the first, I think it's 5 seconds on YouTube, like you don't pay for that impression. Like they've got that kind of sorted out. But in traditional display advertising, that's kind of static on a web page, like you kind of do pay for impressions that people might not even see. Another really ugly part of paid advertising and kind of the ecosystem is that attribution is murky at best. Like we tend to think that the data and all the insights and everything that we see in web analytics is like, set in stone, like it's reliable, it's solid gold. Sometimes true, sometimes not true. The way that platforms, advertising platforms, will often count impressions is a little bit suspicious. Sometimes, I would say. So, here's an example. You're on a web page. Maybe you're reading a news article or something, and the ad loads up in the footer, which is pretty common for news media properties. An impression is counted even if you don't scroll all the way down to the bottom of the page and see that ad. So like the page loaded, that triggered the impression to be counted, but someone's eyeballs didn't actually hit it. That's the classic example. And there are technological processes that work around that. Like the more reputable ad networks will only count an impression if the ad kind of scrolls into the viewport. And the viewport is the active part of your screen in your browser, if you haven't heard that term before. So like that's a better way of counting impressions. But just because something is in the viewport, it doesn't mean that a person saw it or registered, right? Because of that sensory adaptation thing where we tune out repetitive stimuli, right? So something that seems solid, an impression, isn't necessarily solid. We just kind of trust that it is. These metrics, they don't always tell the full story, right? And then you can add in issues like bots, fraudulent clicks, and yes, platforms work to kind of minimize the impact of those, varying degrees of success, I would say. But you can start to see how the data gets really murky. And I will give platforms, reputable ones anyway, credit for working on these problems and improving over time. But still, none of that guarantees real cognitive engagement with an ad. And this is kind of the ugly part. Really, like the bottom line of it is you might be paying for ads that no one actually registers cognitively. So kind of when you stack that problem of media saturation on top of a little bit iffy attribution, the picture's not pretty. And that's not to say that paid advertising doesn't work at all and it's all crap. That's not the case. There wouldn't be a multi-hundred of billions of dollars industry built around it if it was all just a scam. Like paid advertising does work, but perhaps not as well as we think or count on. And you shouldn't count on it when you're growing your business, especially when you're starting out. So here's kind of a smarter approach to using paid advertising as a part of your marketing mix. Like where does this leave us, right? We shouldn't ditch paid ads completely, but we do need to kind of think about them a little bit more holistically. And I like to think of paid ads as a booster rocket. They'll get you off the ground, but they won't sustain your entire flight. The real engine of your growth should be the systems that you own. Your email list, your content, your community. The best way to stretch the value of ads is to capture residual benefits as you're advertising in paid channels. Don't just run ads to make a sale, is kind of the long and short of that. Run an ad that also builds your owned audience. And you can kind of do this in the life cycle of your advertising funnel, right? Like you place an ad, it goes to a landing page. On that landing page, maybe you've got an add to cart button, but perhaps you've also got a pop-up that's like sign up for our email list and get 10% off. Like, you've probably seen that in action, right? You click on that ad, you land on that website, you see that pop up, and the business is willing to trade you a discount to get your email address. They're really hedging their bets with that tactic. Even if you don't buy right away, they don't have to rely on paying money to an ad network to get in front of you in the future. Now they can market to you, they can build a relationship with you over time without paying that extra cash, right? They can follow up and make the sale later, and hopefully a second sale, and a third sale, and a fourth sale. Hopefully, through that organic channel that they own, they don't have to spend a ton of money to build a mutually beneficial relationship with you. And that's smart marketing. That's how you create compounding value from something that would otherwise just like vanish the moment that the campaign ends. Practical tips. Okay, so some practical tips. How do you put this into practice? And, I know that this is a podcast. We're only really talking for 15, 20 minutes here. There's a lot to this topic. But here's some basics, some steps to kind of start out with. Before running a paid ad campaign, like any paid ad campaign, when I'm working with clients on this stuff, I really stress you got to lay the groundwork first. So before you start running ads, make sure you've got the systems in place to collect emails or phone numbers as a part of that advertising process. That can be as simple as a sign-up form on your website. You can connect it to a tool that lets you send newsletters or social campaigns, something a little bit more targeted that isn't in the paid advertising like sphere. You also want to pair ads with incentives. If you're paying for traffic, don't waste it. Offer a discount, a bonus, free piece of content, something in exchange for an email sign up with permission to contact. That way you can start to nurture that relationship over time and kind of build the value that consumer sees. Like, you really want to pull them in, that person who came to you through an ad, and show them why they should do business with you and keep doing business with you. You also want to use frequency capping when you're running paid ad campaigns, and this is something that a lot of small businesses and growing businesses kind of miss. You don't want to bombard the same person endlessly. If they've seen your ad 10 times and haven't clicked, the 11th time that they see it it's not going to change their mind. So you want to kind of preserve your budget and save it for reach that will have a better shot. Give you more people to kind of look at. And that's what frequency capping does. Like, with frequency capping, all that you're doing is saying, ad network, don't show this particular campaign or, piece of creative, however you have it set up. Don't show this thing to a single person more than X times. That's the basics of it. Another piece of advice, build nurture sequences. So once someone signs up, don't just let them sit there. Send them valuable content, share stories, build your brand, offer relevant products and offers. Use the information that you have to tailor your outreach to them as much as you can. Final piece of advice that I kind of give to people who are working on this in their business, measure and adjust. So you definitely want to track your marketing efficiency ratio, your MER. That's the easiest kind of thing to track is big picture. Keep an eye on your cost per acquisition of a new customer. If that value, like if the number starts climbing and gets a little bit ugly, rebalance your mix, pull back on ads, look at what you're doing, invest in other channels. Your MER, tracking your MER is really kind of the key to all that. And in the show notes, I've got put a link to the template that I use to kind of track MER. So, if you're unfamiliar with that, go there, copy it to your Google account, play around with it, and kind of modify it for your own use as you need to. Okay, wrapping up, kind of some final takeaways. Here's the big picture. Paid ads, they're not evil, but they're also not magic. They're just a tool, a single tool, a very powerful tool, but one that needs to be kind of handled with care and used alongside other tools. If you treat ads like the entire engine of your growth, you're creating risk for your business. Costs rise, platforms change, media saturation kicks in. Suddenly, the fire you thought was warming your business gets a little too hot and starts to kind of burn through the fringe of your margins. But if you treat ads like a booster rocket alone, something that helps you accelerate quickly while you build stronger systems underneath, then you're setting yourself up for resilience. You're building a stronger business over the long term. You'll still get the benefits of speed and reach with this strategic approach, but you'll also be building assets that last: your owned audience, your relationships with customers, and your reputation. So that's how you balance the short-term convenience of paid advertising with the long-term efficiency of more organic, intentional growth. So yeah, use paid ads, but do it with a plan. Use them to kickstart momentum, capture signups, build channels that you control, relationships that you own. Blend them into your mix. Don't let paid ads dominate that mix. Because at the end of the day, you don't just want to rent eyeballs for attention. You want to own the relationship, right? That's what gives your business staying power. And that's it for this episode of The Journey Podcast Edition. Thanks for spending the time with me today. If you want to dive deeper, check out the companion post. I mentioned that there's a spreadsheet template linked in there that I use for my own work. So, go check that out. There's some other resources in there you can look at. And this podcast is just one part of the journey. We've got a growing archive of posts, tools, and downloads designed to help you build smarter, stronger, and more sustainably. So if you're new to the show, go check out the archive of stuff that I've done in the past. It's all free to access. Just click the link, have a read through. It's all there for you, and I hope it helps. See you next time.
And that's it for this episode of The Journey Podcast Edition. If you're building something from scratch or scaling something messy, make sure to follow, share, or just send this to someone else in the trenches. Until next time, keep climbing.